So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Book Club of California's Southern California program titled Inventing Paradise, the Power Brokers Who Created the Dream of Los Angeles. And thank you for joining us here at our favorite SoCal space, Pasadena Heritage, in the beautiful and historic Blinn House. My name is Kevin Kosick, and I'm the Executive Director for the Book Club of California, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all here and MC the program this evening. For those of you who are new to us, the Book Club of California is a nonprofit, member and donor-supported organization that is dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts. Oftentimes, we do that with a focus on the history and the literature of California and the West. The book club publishes limited edition, finely made books. We have a scholarly journal called the Quarterly Newsletter, and we have keepsakes for our members. We host a year-round series of exhibitions and programs, like the one this evening, on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, collecting, California history, and much, much more. Now, if you're not a member of the book club, or if your membership has lapsed and you're interested in what we do, please consider joining our century-long tradition. Our membership dues are modest, the benefits are many, and we simply can't do the work of the book club without the support of our members. So go online to find out more at bccbooks.org or speak to me after tonight's program. And now for tonight's program. It is titled Inventing Paradise, the Power Brokers Who Created the Dream of Los Angeles. And our speaker is Paul Haddad. Born in Hollywood, Paul Haddad is an author, novelist, and television writer. He received a BA in Communications Media from UC San Diego and an MFA from USC's School of Cinematic Arts. This is my favorite fact. While there, he won a student Emmy for his documentary thesis film, Taxi Dancer. Please congratulate him for that. He has written many books, books about sports, a few young adult novels, and some science fiction in there. But you may know his wildly popular 10,000 Steps a Day in LA, 52 Walking Adventures from Santa Monica Press in 2015. It was so popular, the second edition, called 10,000 Steps a Day in LA, 57 Walking Adventures, was released just before the pandemic. Perfect time for people who needed to get out and take a walk. Now, Freewaytopia, How Freeways Shaped Los Angeles, was published in 2021, and his latest book, again, the subject of tonight's talk, explore the history and the growth of the great city of Los Angeles. That book and the subject is Inventing Paradise, the Power Brokers Who Created the Dream of Los Angeles. In the late 1870s, Los Angeles was a violent, dusty, 29-square-mile pueblo with a few thousand souls, largely unchanged since its founding in 1781. By 1930, its size had swelled to within 96% of its current 468 square miles, housing a staggering 1.2 million people. In just 50 years, Los Angeles had joined the ranks of other world-class cities. Now, in his book, our speaker traces the improbable rise of Los Angeles through the prism of 6 visionaries who had outsized influence on the city's growth. It also covers the heavy costs that came with creating paradise in such a short period of time. Now, if you have questions for our speaker, please wait till the end. We will have time for some questions. We also have almost all of your books here, I think, for you to sign.
The 2 you mentioned in this one. So.
Three books that I mentioned are here for him to sign if you're interested and to check out. We can do that after we do our Q&A. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Paul Haddad.
Thank you, everybody, for showing up, and it's an honor to be speaking to these esteemed members of the California Book Club. Everyone matters. I hope to join it myself, actually. As Kevin was saying, thank you for the introduction. It sets up this book very well. This is really the story of how Los Angeles and its modern boundaries came to be. And why did some cities remain independent, like Pasadena, Glendale, Culver City, Beverly Hills, instead of being absorbed by Los Angeles? And so this book goes into the blow-by-blow details of when each community, some were unincorporated, some were their own little cities, like Hollywood, Venice, they were their own municipalities, Eagle Rock, and then they joined LA, and it gets into the stories as to why. So the perspective of this, as Kevin alluded to in this book, is telling it through the story, through the eyes of the six, I call them the Gang of Six. They were the oligarchs of their time. And so when you're reading the book, you're we're cross-cutting between each of these six individuals to make it more entertaining and almost like a movie, because they all knew each other, with the exception of Banning, who kind of lived before the other five, and their stories span decades. So it really lent itself to a book of this form, and which is why I also focused on these individuals, because they seem to have the most weight in bringing LA up to the modern age. So these are five, where's the sixth one? Sherman dropped off somehow. Well, Moses Sherman is the third one. I'm not sure why I dropped off this slide. It was there at one point when I created it, but we'll get into him in a minute. Phineas Banning is known as the father of Los Angeles Harbor. General Otis in the middle there, and Chandler both ran the Times, the LA Times. Both were also real estate moguls. Harry Chandler took over the Times from Otis. Henry Huntington, we're in his backyard right now, created Huntington Gardens and much of northeast Los Angeles, and was a streetcar empire, as was Moses Sherman. And William Mulholland, everybody knows from Mulholland Drive, the movie Chinatown, and the whole history of LA's water wars. This is what Los Angeles looks like today, more or less. This map is from 1915, I believe, but it essentially reflects today's boundaries. Because during that period, as Kevin said, this is when LA acquired 96% of its current boundaries from the old 29 square miles, which is kind of clustered around Olvera Street, Union Station, and Old Los Angeles, near the LA River. The river, of course, was the lifeblood of LA. There was a little water wheel which helped fill in some of the zanjas. William Mulholland was an early employee of the City Water Company, which you can kind of see here in this picture from about the 1880s, near the LA River. This would be near the current Olvera Street. And he was a zanja digger, a zanjero, William Mulholland before he became the head of the water department. Phineas Banning steps into the picture right after the Civil War. In fact, LA at the time was mostly a Confederate town, and Banning was a Unionist, and what he did was he swung a deal with the US government when Banning came out here from Delaware, from Wilmington, Delaware, and helped set up what's currently known as the Port of Los Angeles. And he established that in San Pedro, and at that time, San Pedro was its own town. He created Wilmington after his birthplace in Delaware, which is still a city next to San Pedro. And he also created this railway between the harbor and downtown LA, which was the first railway in all of Southern California. He built it in 1869. He essentially was he owned the wagon route between the harbor and downtown, current downtown, for about 10 years before he converted the wagon trail to a railway, thus cutting all the ships, all the goods and freight from ships, and the transportation was cut down from 1 week to an afternoon once he built the railroad. So the Southern California Railroad system was the first of its kind. San Pedro LA Railroad, it was called. Now, as I mentioned earlier, he is known as the father of Los Angeles Harbor. This is a current picture of the port of Los Angeles, the busiest port in the Western Hemisphere. There was some competition when Banning was building his port. The 1880s, 1890s, Union Southern Pacific decided that they wanted to build their own port and have a monopoly over it. So they built what's known as the Long Wharf in Santa Monica. And that's near where PCH hits Sunset Boulevard. That's where this 1 mile pier was, which jutted out into the water because you needed a deep water port in order for ships to come in and not get bogged down on sand. The Port of Los Angeles also, that was a semi-deep water port, but Banning helped convince the government to dredge some of the harbor and create a breakwater. Now, unfortunately, Banning died in 1884 when he was hit by a cable car in San Francisco. So his legacy was cut short. However, he is very instrumental to the growth of LA, particularly that strip that I talked about between the harbor and downtown, which we know today is the shoestring strip, or the Alameda corridor, which is the main corridor which he helped create by building his wagon and railway routes. Now, when he died, that's when General Harrison Gray Otis took over the harbor fight. He really wanted to build up the Port of Los Angeles as the Port of LA. In 1899, behind the Los Angeles Times, a lot of their publicity from the newspaper, he created the Free Harbor Jubilee, which was a 2-day jubilee festival in which the harbor was opened officially. I love this poster so much, I have a reprint of it in my living room. And the reason it was called a free harbor is because this was a counter to Southern Pacific trying to create a monopolistic harbor in Santa Monica. And that eventually went away and never did much business. So thanks to also the federal government helping dredge a deep harbor in this area where it is today, that's why we have the harbor where it is. Now, Otis was a very interesting guy because he really was the first one to kind of wave that flag of LA as a modern city and a free city. Now, what do we mean by a free city besides, having a harbor that's open to everybody instead of just Southern Pacific? He didn't want any unionists here. He didn't want any unions or labor unions at all. His LA Times constantly espoused that in order for LA to grow, keeping union folks out was important, because San Francisco, for example, is very much a union town, and it was 30% more expensive to do business there, or in other union towns like Philadelphia and New York, and this was the Wild West, and it should be kept free of all guilds. And of course, in 1910, the LA Times building was bombed by 2 unionist brothers, and it killed 22 people. And that just made him double down on LA being a free city and also villainizing anyone who was in a union. He said there's one way to cover a union story, and that's the Times way. And Chandler felt the same way, his son-in-law, when he took over. He was also very militaristic. He served not only in the Civil War, but the Spanish-American War when he was in his 60s. He had a cannon on the hood of his car, a little cannon ornament. And he called the LA Times the Fortress, especially when he rebuilt it. And the Phalanx was where he conducted business, his office. And he had houses called the Bivouac and the Outpost. He also bought the first land in the valley, which I'll get to later, but it was near today's Porter Ranch. And he created a syndicate to buy land out there when it was still the hinterlands. The Los Angeles Times during his reign started to put out a midwinter edition, which lasted till the 1960s, started in the early 1900s. And it was sent to all the snowbound people back east on New Year's Day as a way to kind of entice them to move to LA, because you could pluck oranges and get away from the frigid cold. And that would always be advertising, typically it would have a lot of ads from Sunkist and produce companies, which also, of course, were delivered on trains that had LA banners and produce banners on the side. You see them today in antique stores, those old produce labels. Now, getting to some of our other founding fathers of modern day LA, there is Harry Chandler in a touring car, along with, on the left, in that bowler hat, Henry Huntington. Now, an interesting part of my book is that the more I researched it, the more I realized we really have not advanced much beyond, let's just say, social graces or lack thereof are the same now as they were back then. So everybody being really rude on the internet and everything, these guys sniped at each other like middle schoolers. And all you have to do is look at their letters to one another. They're friends one minute, then they're enemies, and they're frenemies because they're ganging up on someone else. That, to me, is one of the more entertaining parts of the book, is it kind of breathes life into the relationships of these people. I also want to add that they're also not just driven by greed. They all have these kind of inner motivations that also really drove them. And the book gets into kind of like the psychology of what drove them to want to be the tops of their fields. And speaking of partnerships, so there is a young Moses Sherman with the big mutton chops, looking like he stepped out of a Smith Brothers ad for cough drops. He and Henry Huntington were the first ones to do to lay down streetcar lines throughout Southern California, and they partnered up on a streetcar between LA and Pasadena that you see in the lower right there in 1895. Currently the route of the Arroyo Seco Parkway. So they were the first ones to span LA with Pasadena. Now Sherman did a lot on his own with, in fact, even before Huntington, he was the first trolley king in Southern California in the 1890s. He was a former school teacher, just had a knack for buying distressed routes and then combining them all into a main route. He created the balloon route in the 1890s that was essentially taking people to Venice, Playa del Rey, Santa Monica, the coast, before anyone had really seen it. And because that was also not really built up. I mean, Santa Monica was somewhat, it was its own city. And what you could do for $1 was hop on a train at downtown, like at 9 in the morning, and then go on a 100-mile loop to all these areas, including you can get a little tour of the Port of Los Angeles. You could walk on the mile-long pier, because at that point, Southern Pacific realized it was a failure and they're trying to like capitalize on it. People could pay like $1 to walk on it or something. So this balloon route was very important in opening up the west side. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Venice used to be its own city. It was founded by Abbot Kinney. We all know Abbot Kinney, those who live here, Abbot Kinney Drive, I believe it is, in Venice. And he came up with the idea of canals and having pleasure zones, and it was very popular in the early 1900s, established in 1904. Now, the common knowledge is that Abbot Kinney created the first Venice beach of California, right? It was his idea. Actually, that researched this book, that's a myth. It was Moses Sherman came up with the first Venice. So his railways took you to the west side, and 2 years before Abbot Kinney, he created what was called Venice Colony. And it was called the Colony for Millionaires. And not only did he create the first Venice before Abbot Kinney ripped off his idea 2 years later, but the existing canals in Venice are the ones that were built by Moses Sherman, not Abbot Kinney. All of Abbot Kinney's canals were, once Venice merged with LA just paved right over them. And by 1927, they were all paved over, except for the 6 remaining ones, which are a little south of the main part of Venice and are still there. It is a millionaires colony, multimillionaires now. And one of the canals is called Sherman Canal. So there it is, hiding in plain sight, that he was the originator of Venice and gets to retain the existing canals in the legacy can trace back to him. Sherman did more than just create streetcar lines. He also came up with a town called Sherman. That's today's West Hollywood. It was called Sherman up until 1925, at which point they were considering going independent. They stayed unincorporated until 1987 when it became West Hollywood. And they chose the name West Hollywood to capitalize off of the popularity of Hollywood. That was actually in the 20s. It just they didn't incorporate until 6 years later. The Big Blue Whale, as it's known, that's the Pacific Design Center. That's on San Vicente near Melrose. That is the same area in Sherman's time, or afterwards actually, when the Red Line was going through there. But that's where he had his hub of stations. And then his lines were taken over by Huntington and some other successors. Now, Huntington was the first one to establish the red lines. Those were interurban lines that you could take from one city to the next. The yellow lines that he created were they were routes that were within Los Angeles. But the red lines were important because it opened up all of Southern California to transit. That scene, does anyone know what that's from in the upper left? What movie? Who Framed Roger Rabbit? So that's Bob Hoskins on the bumper with a bunch of kids who jump on, and Hoskins remarks to them, and this takes place in the 40s. He says, "We have the best public transit in the world here in LA," which would soon, go away with the advent of freeways. But interestingly, freeways, if you look at that red car map from 1910 or so, or 09, or whatever it is, many of the freeways eventually went over his routes, So at one point there were 1,100 miles of trolley routes going through Southern California. And so he was, he had such a powerful effect on Southern California and owned so many industries. He was known as the puppet master, or kind of portrayed as that in Southern California. And in the upper right is Henry Huntington in San Francisco with Collis Huntington. So the story behind Henry Huntington is, of all 6 people in my book, he was the first one to really come from money. The others were all self-made men, with the exception of, Mulholland never had a big fortune, but he was self-made. And Henry was in line to become the president of Southern Pacific, especially when Collis Huntington died in the late 1890s. And at that point, Southern Pacific was at its peak of power. They were known as the octopus, because they had their hands in so many different areas, not just transit, but gas, electric, other train lines. And so it looked good that Huntington was going to stay up north in San Francisco. That's where this picture is. And he never would have been one of these moguls helping build Southern California if he was made president of Southern Pacific. He would have stayed in the Bay Area. In fact, they determined, as they were looking for a successor when Collis died in 1899 or so, they hired a phrenologist. That was that quack science where they would analyze the contours of your skull. And the report was very positive on Henry. He had a number 13 ears, which meant he was very intellectual and inventive. And he had a very prominent jaw, which showed endurance. And he had deep set eyes, which indicated perceptiveness. This is all just a joke. But at the time, it was taken very seriously. Unfortunately, he was passed over by E.H. Harriman. And so, as a result, Huntington came to Southern California and said, well, I'm going to build my empire here. This is once he was passed over to become the vice president. Still did okay for himself when he left Southern Pacific. He got a severance of like $50 million in 1900 money. So you can imagine how much that is worth now. Now, my book also gets in other people, Ed Doheny, who started the oil business here. There are other players in my book. It's not just about these 6, including these women who helped establish incorporated cities that withstood, for a while, the encroachment of Los Angeles. Hollywood was its own city for about 10 years, up to 1910. It was co-founded by Dieta Wilcox. The name Wilcox is one of the streets. She came up with the name Hollywood, based on the hollies in the hills. They're disputing stories there, but she was very influential. The Toyon berries, they're known as, technically. And then in Santa Monica, that is Arcadia Bandini de Stearns Baker, who was one of the co-founders of Santa Monica. Everybody kind of comes and goes in my book. It's rooted by these 6 men, but there are many other individuals who help tell the story of Los Angeles. Now, we saw a picture earlier of Henry Huntington being like a puppet master, but the true puppet master, if you ask me, is Harry Chandler. Yet we know the least about him. And he's purposely behind the scenes like the Wizard of the Wizard of Oz. He was the one pulling all the strings, paying off mayors, hiring the behind the scenes the police chiefs, and bringing in income and venture capitalists, and helping build LA from a cultural standpoint, from a business standpoint. In one way or another, he's involved in the opening of the Hollywood Bowl Other cultural icons, the movie industry, he helped woo here, especially when he was running the Times by 1914. He and Christine Sterling created Olvera Street to kind of bring back the romantic past of LA, and even if it was kind of cheesy and commodified. He helped establish Caltech. He got the Coliseum built because he won the Olympics here, which would also showcase that LA has arrived to the world. So really, he has done everything, all the different sectors of LA that are successful, he had a hand in. He also built the Hollywood sign. That was his idea. Because he was an early investor in Hollywoodland, and of course the sign used to read Hollywoodland. Now his BFF was Moses Sherman. And Sherman is in a lot of photos where you rarely see Chandler in the first place, but when you do, you usually see Sherman looking very self-assured with his arms crossed. And Sherman was known as the spy. So Chandler would have Sherman do the dirty bidding, like serve on the water board so we can get an aqueduct down here. Or, you know, work behind the scenes and trying to finagle people to invest or work on city posts where he was basically doing the bidding of Chandler. These are some different shots where they opened Mulholland Drive in 1924. It's 101 years old now. It's the very LA street going over the crest line to the Santa Monica Mountains. This is the opening of Hollywoodland. And they had a lot of businesses on their own. They both did very well. They had oil, a lot of oil industries that they owned up in Fort Tejon and in Mexico. They also were, Sherman and Chandler, they were one of the first investors in the San Fernando Valley. And Chandler created a syndicate right when they knew that the water was going to come down because a water bond had passed to build the aqueduct in 1908, which would bring water to LA by 1913, thanks to the design engineering work by William Mulholland. And so like the movie Chinatown, which is fiction, but it's rooted in some truth, there were people who had an in on that, knowing that was going to happen. And so they bought up a lot of land very cheaply in the valley. And we're talking like 68 square miles. Most of the valley was bought up by a syndicate that had Chandler, Sherman, Huntington was part of it, so was Otis until he died. And so even some of these cities, early cities, Marion was named after Otis's daughter, and that became Reseda. And even Owens Mouth is a giveaway that there was going to be water coming from Owens Valley, the aqueduct. So it was all kind of these little hints that something was going to happen. Now the valley was not part of LA yet. And in order to be part of Los Angeles, in order to get the water that would come down from Los Angeles, you had to join LA, and that's one reason why so many communities joined Los Angeles, because they needed the water, because their own wells were running dry. So that's a big reason why LA expanded, which I'll get to more of that in a minute. When they opened up the valley to, as I said, Owens Mouth was one of the communities. That eventually became Northridge. But when Owens Mouth opened up in 1912, it was Chandler who also championed cars. He created the Auto Club. He wanted LA to be a very car-centric town because he also thought it was the future, and he had stakes in gasoline and oil. And so there was a race along what today is known as Van Owen. Everyone knows Van Owen Boulevard. It's 18 miles west-east across the valley, and it was the first street kind of designed for cars, for automobiles. And yes, it had a trolley down the track, but in order to show that it was a very car-centric street, there were races conducted where a car raced an airplane. And people came to watch that, but they had to cut it back early because there was a Santa Ana wind. It was blowing dust in everyone's faces. But they sold a lot of homes along the street. And just like with the balloon route with Moses Sherman, that route took you to a lot of lots that you could buy. And who do you think owned those lots? Moses Sherman. And Chandler owned a lot of the lots here. So now he's enriching himself that way. Or they didn't own the lots, but they're paying, the people who own lots along the transit lines have to pay a subscription, a tax basically, to Sherman or Chandler in this case. So they had you coming and going. And that's a plaster of Paris plaque that was called Owens Mouth Baby. If you bought a lot there, you were an Owens Mouth Baby, and it was also the name of this Fiat that raced the plane. It was such a big deal when they opened, I'm sorry, I said Van Owen, I meant Sherman Way before. So named after Moses Sherman, of course. And it was such a big deal that the next day after the race, or a few weeks later, the Van Nuys News trumpeted that our beautiful Sherman Way is open. And it was such a big deal, it actually superseded this little story off to the side about the Titanic sinking, killing 200 people. So that shows you how myopic LA was then. It was, that's almost like an Onion spoof, isn't it? Now we're introducing Mulholland, reintroducing him. So the LA River sustained LA for its first few decades after the Civil War. But the problem with the LA River is it could only support about 200,000 people. And Chandler and all these guys, they wanted LA to be a major city to compete with New York and San Francisco. You need another water source, thus the aqueduct, which we just talked about. So that the LA River was always flooding. And to sell the idea of an aqueduct to people, the LA Times spun it as God ordained, that it was reclaiming the Owens River, that the Owens River, 300 miles north, actually flowed to LA and was part of the LA River. Complete myth-making. And there were never any geologists quoted. It was just, it is said that, and there were major earthquakes, including one 1,000 years ago that crumbled in front of the Owens River, and it diverted the water, and it used to go to the LA River. And geologists say, everything's very vague. And there's Sherman sitting, he was the main commissioner of the water board to help push the vote through for the aqueduct. They played it very fast and loose. I like to say that these guys were often like tech bros, like break it now, fix it later, ask for forgiveness later, move fast and break things, I think was the slogan for Facebook at one point, or Zuckerberg. These were the move fast and break things guys of their time. But they were Republicans, all of them, mostly, but very pro-business and stuff, which you kind of see that also in Silicon Valley now. This was the building of the aqueduct. These are some snapshots when that's Mulholland at the time. He brought it in under time and under budget, and it was considered the greatest engineering feat of its time. Certainly, it was the greatest engineering feat the United States had experienced until the next year when the Panama Canal opened, 1914, which is another reason why the port of Los Angeles is where it is, because a lot of the ships coming up the coast would hit the port of LA before they go to San Francisco, so it's important to have a very big port in LA. And of course, there is a backstory that I get into in my book, which is this is Lippincott over here, and Eaton, like the Eaton fires over here, same family. They went up north and posed as ranch farmers to buy the land cheaply from Owens Valley farmers who didn't realize they're actually selling their land to the city of LA, who would take their water. And LA's been paying reparations ever since. The opening of the aqueduct was a big deal, the biggest event in LA since the Jubilee of the Port of Los Angeles opening in 1899. This was another big, major deal. 40,000 people showed up on horseback, on cars, wagons, trains. Mulholland famously said, after they turned the spigots and the water came gushing down, there it is, take it. And this, of course, is still here. This is the little spillway that you see off the 5 as you're driving north in the Sylmar area. Still there. People were lining up for the water. Otis is still alive, saw it happen. And there's Mulholland on the right there. Mulholland was deified after this. He could do no wrong. He was an autodidact. He was completely self-taught. He learned engineering in the LA library. And he came here, rose up from a ditch digger coming from Ireland when he was only 16 years old. And, they wanted to honor him. So there was Mulholland Hills, which is where I grew up. It turns out it was near Coldwater Canyon in Mulholland. Today it's near the Franklin Canyon Reservoir. But at the time, that section was known as Mulholland Hills. This is Mulholland, the little town, which is now Pacoima in the valley, the Mulholland Drive. And he was known as the modern Muhammad. But many of these names went away in 1928. Some of you may know why, which I'll get to, but that's when they started stripping his name from some of the names that were given to him for these different cities and neighborhoods. The other thing that after the reservoir opened that LA was considering doing was building a monument in his honor that would be called the Los Angeles Aqueduct Monument or Memorial. And on the top was going to be a 30-foot statue of a woman, and she would be called Miss Los Angeles, and she had a chalice of water that trickled down this whole column about 275 feet to the bottom. And this would have been built at Exposition Park near the Coliseum with observation decks. So it would be our version of the Statue of Liberty. Again, everyone was thinking big then, and this never got the money behind it to build it, but that really would have been something.
They didn't build it?
No, it never got built. No, and there was going to be a statue of Mulholland on the street that also never happened. And again, because of this scandal in 1928, everything kind of went away. The annexing with LA created its own share of problems. Yes, you got some water, you got a better school district, maybe, you got better utilities, but it wreaked havoc. LA had a rule that there was no drinking or dancing on Sundays. So when Venice merged with LA in 1926, because its wells had run dry, Santa Monica had a better water supply, so they didn't need to merge. And Santa Monica had dancing and drinking on Sundays. So when this merge happened in 1928, this annexation, some enterprising photographer set up some people dancing, and there's a line here, and this part is Venice, and this officer is kind of looking at them disapprovingly. There's no Sunday dancing. And yes, these folks are in Santa Monica, and this is an officer blowing a harmonica, doing a little jig with them. So that gave a very stark example of one difference between joining LA and not. Also, there were people like in Palms. The town of Palms used to be its own city for like 30 years. And then there was a breakaway part that annexed with LA and another one that didn't. And these are some of the stories I get into that have been kind of lost to time. And many of them are very entertaining, fascinating. In this case, there were school children who one morning woke up and they realized that they were still living in Palms, but their neighbors across the street were now Angelenos. They lived in LA because the new dividing line was their street. And some of the kids went across the street to go to school, and they were stopped at the elementary school that they'd been going to for years. Like, you can't go here. Like, what? This is my school. No. You don't live in this is an LA school now. You still live in Palms. Get back over there. There were no schools in Palms. So what do? You have to negotiate with LA. So it created havoc before they really thought a lot of this through. This was another example of that. Has anyone ever heard of Barnes City? It was a very short-lived town for about 8 months in 1926. It was a circus town near today's like Sony, where MGM used to be, Culver City area, off of Venice Boulevard. And Al Barnes was kind of the Ringling Brothers of his time, and he had a whole menagerie of animals, and he created it as a tax shelter, basically. It was its own independent city. But of the 2,500 people who lived there, half of them did not work for his circus, and they were complaining that it was a bogus city. And they even said that when the city was founded, he had monkeys in cages voting to incorporate. So there was literally monkey business going on with Barnes City. So they took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court nullified the city and said you have to unincorporate. And so they had to unincorporate, and there was even a vote on that, and Barnes had some of his circus carnies on trains voting and then sending it, via other trains or whatever. So, that was rigged voting all the way. And then it disincorporated, and then within 2 weeks, LA set up a special election for its citizens saying, should we incorporate, or should we merge or add Barnes City's former space to LA? And the answer is yes. And so it joined LA like just weeks after it dissolved. By the 1920s, LA had created what was essentially being billed as a paradise to the world. And now you're getting into post-World War I. LA is now the largest city by square miles in the United States. It trumped New York City. By 1920, it was the largest city by population in California, topping San Francisco. By 1923, you'd have 1 million people. So a lot of people were moving here, drawn by not just the weather, but by industry. You also had people from the South and from Eastern Europe coming here. And the Times was pushing a very much like anti-immigrant stance on people coming here. And then there was editorials saying, welcome to the white spot, where there were people living in areas that they were worried of it being populated by different ethnicities. And so the white spot became code for a good economic place to build a house or start a business. And it was kind of a dog whistle, like a wink, wink. So what you had were, at some point, the white spot became overt. So by the mid-20s, you had advertisements for many places that are very progressive today, like Eagle Rock, Silver Lake, Hollywoodland. They were just openly saying white race only, white or Caucasian race. And, you know, as many of us know, the history of not just LA, but much of the United States is there were racist covenants built into buying a home. And a lot of this presaged the redlining of districts in the 1930s, where you couldn't buy a home if it wasn't, if you wanted to get a federal loan, there were certain rules in which if you didn't qualify for the home, then you couldn't get a loan. So they had, again, if you were a black person or a person of color, it was difficult because the rules were stacked against you. And in Hollywoodland, they literally put a white spot on the mountain underneath the Hollywood sign, which there are pictures of. I always thought this was photoshopped later, but it turns out this glowing white spot was put there by Chandler to advertise Hollywoodland as they were building it as the ultimate white spot. Again, a white spot meant just a good economic place to build homes. I lived in Hollywoodland briefly, and it had a racial covenant in the original house. And so this was a signal that could be seen all the way to Wilshire Boulevard, just like the Hollywood sign, that was lit up at night as the ultimate white spot. I don't know what happened to it. It only lasted a few years. Maybe it fell to the elements or whatever, but yeah, pretty shocking. The other thing that Hollywoodland at the time had going for it was they built this beautiful, and it's still beautiful, Lake Hollywood, which was one of the reservoirs that was built by William Mulholland to help store some of the water from the aqueduct. On the left here, this is the current Mulholland Dam. Lake Hollywood is still there. It's been there like 99 years, 100 years now actually. And this is a very similarly designed dam. This is the St. Francis Dam. It opened around the same time, twice as big, twice as long. This held back 12 billion gallons of water. This holds now probably 8 billion, or 6 billion, Lake Hollywood, so half of it. And they were the first dams that Mulholland built that were these kind of stepped concrete dams. And so the St. Francis Dam lasted all of 3 years, and then it collapsed in March of 1928, 2 minutes to midnight, killing 450 people downstream. And downstream meaning the Santa Clara Valley, because this was built just kind of northeast of Santa Clarita area, San Francisco Canyon. And Mulholland had just been to this dam site 12 hours earlier to check it out because the dam keeper was worried that there was water coming out from under the dam and it had been leaking a lot. And he signed off on it and said, no, it's fine. And that was the beginning of the downfall of Mulholland. Again, he designed the dam by himself, so that was a problem. Also, that was highly regarded for its time, believe it or not, because many of these men in my book, they were from the Gilded Age where you're self-made, and that was a big deal. And it was even considered a badge of honor. And he was many times, as I said, he was deified, and people said Mulholland was smarter than the most highly degreed engineers out there. So now this is a tracing where the location was of the dam, and then bodies were washed up to Ventura and as far south to San Diego. Because this is about 60 miles to the ocean. There was a trial afterwards. There was a coroner's inquest, basically. And he famously said, I envy the dead. Like he was very contrite and couldn't imagine living even. He took sole responsibility after at first they tried to hint that someone had dynamited it. There was an angry Owens Valley farmer. But it turns out that he had built the dam in an area with an ancient fault, and there was a lot of shale, like loose rock, that made it unsafe to buttress the dam into the mountainside there. He made some other mistakes too, like making the dam too high, filling the water too high, things that were not quite understood then that are now. So He was not found guilty of criminal liability, but he was found liable. He was retired from Department of Water and Power, and there is new laws in place that dams have to be created by committees of people, not by one man. So, it had a profound effect. They stripped his name away from a lot of institutions. They wanted to take his name off Mulholland Drive. That stayed. And they even wanted to tear down Lake Hollywood. There was a big movement afoot because everybody living south of this, Capitol Records, all those areas, downtown Hollywood's right under this. And they said this thing's gonna blow at some point, or the next earthquake. We want it gone. We want it demolished, we want the lake drained. And then a compromise was reached because they really needed that water as a reservoir, that the face of the dam would be filled up with dirt. And the media called this a psychological dam. They kind of put a bunch of landscaping there and fortified it with extra dirt up against the face of the dam. And this is how it is today. But they retained these little bear heads that are along the dam, these arches. It's a very nice touch. And kind of just wrapping up here. So Henry Huntington, he eventually built his garden, his galleries, his library, the Blue Boy. Everyone knows these famous paintings he has. He bought the Gutenberg Bible for $50,000. He basically retired from the streetcar scene in 1915. Still lent his name and had his son running some of these transit lines. But he always wanted to create. To him, the fun was in the creating. He married Collis Huntington's widow, his uncle. Collis Huntington's widow was the wealthiest woman in the United States at the time. So the two of them, you can imagine how much money they had, and that's why you've got this giant estate in San Marino that is the Huntington. And whereas Chandler was thinking about cultural, the kind of culture as an economic engine of Los Angeles, his take was more, let's create these cultural oases and not necessarily make money off it, but have a place where people could come and just really be at peace with nature, or like scholars in his museum, or people admiring paintings. And that's what it is today. So he always felt like the most profound thing for him is creating enterprises. Once he built them, he was kind of moving on to the next thing. As far as Chandler, I kind of talked about his legacy earlier, but there was even more. He helped get money behind the first freeway, the Arroyo Seco Parkway. Chandler outlived the other men, so he lived into the 40s and became very conservative and a proponent of eugenics. That's a whole other part I get to in the book, to a point where Caltech stripped his name off their buildings in 2020 because he had helped co-found Caltech. So that was the time period where he was admiring Nazis and the pure blood of what they're doing in Nazi Germany before everyone knew the extent of the criminality. But that was kind of a movement in the 30s that he was a part of, which I cover in the book. He also helped bring the aerospace industry here. He was friends with Donald Douglas, and Chandler would basically set up shop in the California Club, and he'd bring in all the richest people and say, we're going to donate to have aerospace here. This guy Douglas needs to build some planes. How much are you going to write a check for? And they'd write it for $5,000 or whatever, and he'd rip it up if it wasn't enough. So no one wanted to get on Chandler's bad side. And as I mentioned earlier, he helped create the auto club and brought the tire industry here too, because not only did he bring car manufacturing here like Ford and GM, but also Goodyear, Goodrich. I mean, you honestly can't tell the story of LA without his fingerprints over everything. And the legacy of Huntington and Sherman is seen in our freeways and our street system. These, as I said earlier, are very similar. Here's the red car lines from 1910. Here's a freeway map that Caltrans put out in 1958. Much of it reflects today's freeways. There's a lot of overlap. And let's face it, Huntington was just building his train lines where there were already wagon lines, or the Spanish conquistadors had gone through Sepulveda Pass, Cahuenga Pass. Before then, Native Americans, everyone's using these same, canyons and passes and just finding quicker ways to get through them. And freeways were supposed to be the answer. Now they're one of the slower ways sometimes. And of course, we're trying to reroute, we're basically establishing trains over many of these old routes again. This is also a modern day picture of LA with the same borders from like 100 years ago. These shaded areas, I get into at the end of my book, like what's been the cost of paradise? One of the costs is when there was white flight after World War II and everyone kind of moved to the suburbs, it left behind kind of like areas that are now have, you know, lack of parks or lack of infrastructure, lack of upkeep, a lot of freeways. They weren't really kept up the way suburbs are. So these are areas where in 2020, LA formed a committee to kind of address areas of need. And 87% of the areas in need are these, like the shoestring strip, the Northeast Valley, 87% people of color living there. But again, the money that goes toward these areas of needs, it's not race-based, it's based on what needs more parks, what needs more grocery stores, where can we incentivize businesses to go and move there, open up whatever, a Gap, theaters, etc. That's in the areas that were at one point the most exclusive sections, especially here to live in LA, that now have gone to areas that are now more, you know, suburban and more Caucasian areas. So it's, you know, again, it all goes back to where areas were restricted from people living, like Silver Lake, Eagle Rock, and then where they weren't. And this is the rerouting of trains over some of the lines that Huntington established. So we have trains along the 210 freeway, along the 105, and this was the Hollywood freeway back when there was a train going there to the valley. And we now have the red zone, the red line going underneath. And as far as water, we've kind of come full circle again because William Mulholland was a big proponent of the LA River and conserving water. Even though he built the aqueduct, he was very much a conservationist. And we're trying to get to a point where we can have the LA River repopulated by native vegetation, and also by 2035 to have wastewater be 100% recycled in Los Angeles. So there's a lot of aspirational goals with water that Mulholland, I think, would be very proud of because that was the way he thought. And I end my book, and I actually started with the same note, which is Los Angeles should not exist. It was willed into being by people who wanted to create a paradise, to make money here, to take advantage of the climate. And so we're left with, exotic trees like palm trees that are not even real sometimes, or disguised as cell phone towers. You know, everything's very manufactured. A Japanese garden in a wastewater plant in Sepulveda Basin. I mean, this is Los Angeles in a nutshell. And of course, accelerating traffic and having a musical from the opening of La La Land on the 105 freeway where you're merging onto the 110. And it's what makes LA a special place. And I kind of, my ending thought is that, Los Angeles should not exist, but by the same token, it always would have existed because it's kind of in our DNA as human beings to create paradise. You think of the Garden of Eden or Shangri-La, every religion, every place has their own version of paradise. And so that's just something we always aspire to. And because the conditions were right to manufacture that here, I think it was always destined to exist. So there you have it. That's why it's the dream of Los Angeles. All right, that's it. And thank you. I'll do Q&A.
Yeah, you can stay there.
Yeah. Anything to add or no?
No,
Okay.
I'm gonna just yell from here. So
Okay,
I need
great.
to be near. Do we have any questions? Candace?
What's that little town that's by, like Owens Lake that people are really upset about?
Independence? Bishop? Probably Bishop.
No, it's not even that big.
Big
Well,
Pine?
this was.
Big Pine?
What?
Big Pine?
No, I should have thought this through. It's where they drain it's like half empty, gone into the Cahuenga or whatever the river is that.
Yeah, the Owens River. Yeah.
Owens River, there's a little town there that people really liked, and it seems to have is getting,
Well,
they lost their water. Okay, never mind.
no, but that's important because it is some of the worst air in the United States because the LADWP has to put water back into Owens Valley in order to not have toxic air coming off, Mono Lake and the Owens Valley lake bed and everything.
Yeah,
I
I didn't think that through.
Okay.
I just think
No worries.
there's a son that lives
Well, if it
there.
comes to you, circle back.
We can come back.
Yeah.
Yeah, next year I'll be back.
Other questions?
thought I saw a hand. We'll go here first and then in the back.
What about the movie industry? Do these guys have anything to do with bringing the movies?
Yeah, I alluded to that briefly earlier with Chandler when I showed the Chinese theater. So great story with him. I mean, it's amazing the favors he was able to pull and how much power he had. But when the Christie brothers came out here in 1914 to get away from Edison in New Jersey, New York, where Edison was very litigious because he had a patent on movie cameras. So a lot of people came out here and they went to Flagstaff or they went to San Francisco like the Christie brothers did. And LA hated San Francisco. We were always trying to steal their thunder and bring people down here. And so Chandler got wind of this, that the Christies were shooting a movie in San Francisco. And what do you think the Christie brothers encountered in San Francisco? Cold weather and fog. And at the time, with silent movies, you had to shoot on outdoor sets. There were no really indoor sets. The sunlight was your light. So Chandler telegraphed them, their folks, and said, or he had the Chamber of Commerce telegraph them and say, warm and sunny in Southern California, come on down. Chandler's going to pay for your whole posse. And he sent commissioned a train to bring down the entire set, all the actors, and they reset up in Hollywood to finish their movie. Loved it so much, the Christie brothers were the first one to create a studio in Hollywood, and others followed suit. And it was like just people marching to Hollywood because of Chandler getting the ball going there.
What year was that?
And then the LA Times also around that time was the first newspaper to have a gossip columnist and talk about movie news. And that was a big deal too. That was his doing. He kind of didn't like artists. They were heathens to him. But he realized there was, guilt behind it. Yeah, it was good for LA, and that was good enough for him. He just didn't want to commiserate with them.
What was the year for that?
Of what?
When the
1914. The gossip column was 1916, and they covered the opening of Intolerance and the Griffith movie, the D.W. Griffith. No one else was doing that, but the Times was.
In the back, yeah.
Future past question. The Panama Canal made us a Pacific trading city.
Yeah.
Now the Panama Canal is too small and the big ships aren't going through there. Is that going to impact our Pacific Rim status, or are we so established?
Well, I think we're so established, and so much of it's from Asia too. So it's really trans-Pacific now, a lot of it. So I've heard that you're trying to upgrade the canal, but I almost feel like it's still. All that said, I don't see how you'll get a bigger port in the Western Hemisphere than the Port of Los Angeles. I just don't see it happening in my lifetime, at least. I don't know if things could change, but yeah.
We'll go here first and then there.
Okay.
Good, yeah.
Yeah. So, the red cars, did you get some benefit from removing them or not? Or was it just a net negative?
Did who get benefit?
The red cars, was there any benefit from removing them and building the freeways, or, what was?
Yeah, many of us heard the conspiracies behind the red car, right? And some of it's kind of half true, that it was, the lines were bought by National Tires and GM, and it was a conglomerate, a consortium that bought the red lines in order to remove them. And they were a private enterprise. They were not well maintained. So the benefit was getting rid of these things that were breaking down, also in a town that was getting more and more auto-centric, especially after World War II. The last red line was pulled up, I think, 1961, 62. And they were replaced by buses, because buses could go places that red cars can't, that street lines cannot. So the idea was basically subbing out buses for them because you had more mobility with buses. So that's the answer to that. That it was kind of gonna die anyway. Didn't even take a conspiracy. Ridership was going down. They weren't maintained. There were even offers to Huntington to buy his red car line while he was still alive. The city of LA wanted to do that, and he turned it down. So.
Back there, yeah.
I'm curious, what was the main industry that drew people to LA during this time? Was it oil or film? Or
Land.
Really
Yeah, just cheap land, and then you can just open up any kind of business you wanted. Oil, certainly 1892, Ed Doheny struck the first oil well near downtown. But in the 1880s, I think there were 6,000 people in 1880, and by 1890 there were 100,000. And it was a big boom, and it was a big bust. 1885 was a big bust. People committing suicide. People are flipping land 7 times in one day, sight unseen. We think it's crazy now, They were buying land. They didn't realize it was underwater in the ocean. It was out in like Palm Springs before there was a Palm Springs, out in the desert. People didn't understand the geography here. They're like, oh, that's cheap. How much? And some were buying in the valley, and eventually, if they held on to it, did well. But again, most of that was bought up by the oligarchs. So it was land. It was cheap land. And also, you can get out here for $1 a day from Chicago. The railways dropped their fares so low that who wouldn't want to come out here? And then the produce was what lured them out here, the land of milk and honey.
Well, a last question or two before we wrap up? Let's wrap up then. Please join me in thanking our speaker.
Thank you.
As I mentioned earlier, we do have copies of Paul Haddad's book here. If you're interested in getting a copy, they're over there to my left, to your right. He's happy to sign them. He's also got copies of Freewaytopia and the other book, the Steps, 10,000 Steps in LA. So if you're interested, please check them out. Thank you all for coming. We look forward to seeing you next year here at Pasadena Heritage. Happy New Year, happy holidays to everyone. We'll see you in January. Thank you.